The morning rush at the subway station was loud and chaotic, just like every other day. Hundreds of people pushed past each other, their eyes fixed on their phones or staring straight ahead. Nobody smiled. Nobody stopped. Everyone was in a hurry to get somewhere important. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise and movement, there was a woman nobody noticed. Her name was Mei Lin, and she was 52 years old. She had deep lines around her eyes and rough hands that told the story of years of hard work. Her coat was old and faded, bought from a thrift store many winters ago. Her shoes had been repaired so many times that she had lost count. She walked slowly through the station, carrying a small bag over her shoulder, trying not to get in anyone's way, but people bumped into her anyway. They pushed past, without saying sorry. They looked right through her like she was made of glass. To them, she was just another face in the crowd. Actually, she was less than that. She was nobody. Mei Lin had gotten used to being invisible. It had happened slowly, over many years, until one day she realized that the world had simply forgotten she existed. She worked as a cleaner at a big office building in the city. Every night, she would arrive at 10 o'clock when all the important people had gone home. She would mop the floors, empty the trash cans, clean the bathrooms, and wipe down the desks. She worked alone, in silence, until 3 or 4 in the morning. Then she would take the subway back to her small apartment, sleep for a few hours, and do it all over again. It was not the life she had dreamed of. But dreams, she had learned, were luxuries that poor people could not afford. That morning, as she walked through the subway station, a young man in an expensive suit bumped hard into her shoulder. Her bag fell to the ground, and a few of her things spilled out. The man did not stop. He did not even look back. He just kept walking, talking loudly into his phone about some business deal that was worth more money than Mei Lin would ever see in her lifetime. She bent down slowly to pick up her things. Her back hurt. It always hurt these days. Nobody stopped to help her. People just walked around her like she was a rock in a river. She gathered her belongings and stood up, took a deep breath, and kept moving. This was her life now. This was who she had become. But there was one thing that nobody knew about Mei Lin. One secret that she kept hidden from the world. Inside her small bag, wrapped carefully in an old cloth, was something precious. Something that connected her to a different time, a different life, a different version of herself that had existed long ago. It was a violin, not an expensive one. The wood was scratched and worn. The strings had been replaced many times. But to Mei Lin, it was worth more than gold. It was the only thing she had left from the person she used to be. You see, 30 years ago, Mei Lin was not a cleaner. She was not invisible. She was not poor and tired and forgotten. 30 years ago, she was a star. She had grown up in a small town where her family had very little money. But from the moment she first heard a violin playing on an old radio, something awakened inside her. She was only 6 years old. But she knew right then that music would be her life. Her parents could not afford lessons. So she taught herself. She borrowed books from the library. She practiced on a broken violin that a neighbor had thrown away. She played until her fingers bled, and then she played some more. By the time she was 16, people in her town were calling her a genius. By 18, she had won a scholarship to one of the best music schools in the country. Her teachers said she had a gift that came along once in a generation. They said she would perform in the greatest concert halls in the world. They said her name would be remembered forever. And for a while, it seemed like they were right. Mei Lin gave her first professional concert at 20 years old. The audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Critics wrote glowing reviews. Important people wanted to meet her. Record labels offered her contracts. Everything she had ever dreamed of was finally coming true. But life has a way of changing direction when you least expect it. When Mei Lin was 22, her father got very sick. The doctors said he needed expensive treatments that the family could not afford. Her mother was too old to work. Her younger brother was still in school. There was no one else. There was only her. So Mei Lin made a choice. The hardest choice of her life. She put down her violin, and she never picked it up again. She took whatever jobs she could find. Waitressing, cleaning, factory work. She sent every penny back home to pay for her father's medical bills. The concert halls and the standing ovations and the glowing reviews became distant memories, like a beautiful dream she had once had. Her father lived for another 8 years because of the treatments she paid for. Mei Lin never regretted her choice. But something inside her broke during those years. Something she thought could never be fixed. After her parents passed away, she found herself alone in a new city with no career, no savings, and no dreams left. She got a job cleaning offices because it was the only work she could find. The years passed by, one after another, each one looking exactly the same as the last. And somewhere along the way, Mei Lin stopped being a person and started being a ghost. She did not have friends. She did not go out. She barely spoke to anyone except to say good morning to the security guard at her building. Her life had become a small, quiet box, and she had forgotten that there was a whole world outside of it. But every night, after she came home from work, something strange would happen. She would sit in her tiny apartment, surrounded by silence, and she would feel a pull, a longing, a voice whispering to her from somewhere deep inside. Sometimes, she would take out the old violin and just hold it. She would run her fingers along the wood, feeling the scratches and dents that held so many memories. She would close her eyes and remember what it felt like to stand on a stage, to feel the lights on her face, to hear the audience holding their breath as she raised her bow. And sometimes, late at night when she was sure nobody could hear, she would play. Just a few notes at first, then a few more. Her fingers were stiff and clumsy after so many years, but the music was still there, buried deep inside her like a seed waiting for water. Nobody knew about these secret moments. Nobody knew that behind the tired eyes and the worn-out coat, there was still a fire burning. Small and fragile, but not completely dead. Mei Lin did not know why she kept playing. She had no audience. She had no future in music. She was 52 years old, invisible to the world, and far too old for dreams. But she played anyway, because the music was the only thing that reminded her she was still alive. And deep down, in a place she was afraid to look, Mei Lin wondered if maybe, just maybe, her story was not over yet. She had no idea that in just a few weeks, everything was about to change. The office building where Mei Lin worked was one of the tallest in the city. During the day, it was full of important people in expensive clothes making important decisions. Lawyers, bankers, executives, people who drove nice cars and lived in big apartments and never had to worry about paying their bills. But at night, when all those important people went home, the building belonged to Mei Lin. She knew every corner of that place, every hallway, every bathroom, every office. She knew which floors had the messiest workers and which ones were neat. She knew which trash cans would be overflowing and which ones would be almost empty. She had cleaned this building for 11 years, and in all that time, almost nobody had ever learned her name. To them, she was just the cleaning lady, a shadow that came and went while they were not looking. There was one night that Mei Lin would never forget. It was a cold Tuesday in November, and she was working on the 32nd floor. This was where the big executives had their offices. The furniture was expensive, the views were beautiful, everything smelled like leather and success. She was emptying a trash can when she noticed something on one of the desks. It was a photograph in a silver frame. A man in a suit stood next to a woman in an elegant dress, and between them was a young girl holding a violin. Mei Lin froze. She stood there for a long moment, staring at that photograph. The girl in the picture looked so happy, so full of hope. She was probably 12 or 13 years old, and you could tell just by looking at her that she loved music, that it was her whole world, just like Mei Lin had once been. She wondered what happened to that girl. Did she follow her dreams? Did she become a famous musician? Or did life get in the way? The same way it had gotten in the way for Mei Lin, she would never know. She put the trash bag aside, picked up her mop, and kept working. But that photograph stayed in her mind for days. It made her think about her own journey, about everything she had lost and everything she had given up. about the person she used to be and the person she had become. Sometimes, late at night, Mei Lin would ask herself a question that had no answer. Was it worth it? She had sacrificed everything for her family. Her career, her dreams, her chance at a different life. And she had done it without complaining, without asking for anything in return. She had done it because she loved them, and because that was what you did when the people you loved needed you. But now her parents were gone. Her brother had his own life in another city. He called her maybe once or twice a year, on holidays. He had a good job, a nice family, children who did not even know what their aunt looked like. He had forgotten her, just like everyone else, and Mei Lin was left with nothing but memories and an old violin that she was too afraid to really play, because playing meant remembering. And remembering meant feeling all that pain again. The pain of everything she had lost. The pain of watching her dreams slip away like water through her fingers. Most nights, she could only manage a few minutes before she had to stop. The emotions were too strong. The memories were too heavy. She would put the violin back in its case and sit in the darkness, wondering if this was all her life would ever be. But then something small happened that started to change things. One evening, while Mei Lin was waiting for her subway train, she saw a young man sitting on a bench with a guitar. He was maybe 20 years old, with messy hair and worn-out shoes. He was playing a simple song, something soft and sad. And a few people had stopped to listen. Mei Lin watched from a distance. She saw the way his fingers moved across the strings. She saw the way he closed his eyes and lost himself in the music. She saw the small smile on his face, even though his guitar case on the ground had only a few coins in it. He was poor. He was struggling. But he was playing anyway. When he finished his song, a woman walked up and dropped $1 into his case. The young man looked up and said thank you with such genuine happiness that it made Mei Lin's heart ache. She reached into her pocket and found a crumpled $5 bill. It was money she had been saving for groceries. But something made her walk over and drop it into his case. The young man looked up at her with surprise. Most people did not give that much. Thank you so much, he said. That means a lot. Mei Lin nodded but did not say anything. She was not good at talking to people anymore. She had forgotten how. But as she turned to walk away, the young man said something that stopped her in her tracks. You know, he said, I can tell you understand music. I can see it in your eyes. Do you play? Mei Lin felt her heart skip. Nobody had asked her that question in 30 years. Nobody had looked at her closely enough to see anything at all. She turned back slowly. I used to, she said quietly. A long time ago. The young man smiled. Music never really leaves us, he said. Even when we think it is gone, it is still there, waiting for us to come back. Then his train arrived, and he packed up his guitar and disappeared into the crowd. Mei Lin stood on the platform for a long time after that, missing her own train, thinking about what he had said. Music never really leaves us. She thought about her violin, sitting in her apartment, waiting for her every night. She thought about all those years of silence, all those years of hiding, all those years of being afraid, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt something stir inside her. Something that had been sleeping for 30 years. Something that felt almost like hope. That night, when she got home from work, Mei Lin did something different. Instead of just playing a few notes and putting the violin away, she played for an entire hour. She played songs she had not played since she was young. She played until her fingers hurt and tears ran down her face. She played until the sun started to come up and light filled her tiny apartment. And when she finally stopped, she realized something important. She was not dead inside. Not yet. The music was still there, buried deep down, waiting for her to find it again. She did not know what to do with this feeling. She did not have a plan. She was 52 years old, with no connections, no money, and no future in music. The world had moved on without her. There was no stage waiting for her. No audience. No second chance, or so she thought. Because sometimes life has a way of surprising us. Sometimes the moments that change everything come when we least expect them. And sometimes the universe puts us exactly where we need to be. At exactly the right time. Mei Lin did not know it yet. But her moment was coming, and it would happen in the place she least expected. December came with bitter cold winds and gray skies that seemed to hang low over the city. The streets were crowded with holiday shoppers carrying bags and rushing from store to store. Christmas lights decorated the windows, and the smell of roasted chestnuts filled the air. But Mei Lin barely noticed any of it. She was walking through the city that evening because her usual subway line was closed for repairs. She had to take a different route home from work, one that would take her through Grand Central Terminal. She had not been to Grand Central in years. There was no reason for her to go there. Her life was small and simple, moving between her apartment and the office building and nowhere else. She had forgotten how big the world could be. When she stepped inside the terminal, she stopped and caught her breath. It was beautiful. The ceiling was painted with stars and constellations, glowing soft green and gold against a deep blue background. The marble floors shone under the lights. People moved in every direction, their footsteps echoing through the enormous space. There was something magical about it, something that made Mei Lin feel like she had stepped into another world. She stood there for a moment, just looking around, feeling very small and very old. Then she heard something that made her heart jump. Music. Someone was playing a piano. Mei Lin followed the sound until she found its source. In the middle of the main hall, there was a black piano sitting on a small platform. A sign next to it said that it was part of a public art project. Anyone could sit down and play. A young woman was at the piano now, playing a simple pop song. She was not very good, but she was having fun. A small crowd had gathered around her, clapping along and taking videos with their phones. When she finished, everyone applauded, and she stood up with a big smile and walked away. Then a man in a business suit sat down and played a few bars of a classical piece before giving up and laughing. Then a little boy climbed onto the bench and banged on the keys while his mother recorded him. Then a teenager played a song that Mei Lin did not recognize. She watched all of this from a distance, standing near a pillar where nobody could see her. Something was happening inside her chest. A feeling she could not name. It was like a rope was pulling her toward that piano, toward the crowd, toward the music. But another part of her wanted to run away. Who was she to play in front of all these people? She was nobody. She was a cleaning lady with worn-out shoes and an old coat. She had not performed in 30 years. She would embarrass herself. People would laugh. People would stare at this foolish old woman who thought she could make music. No, it was a crazy idea. She should just go home. Mei Lin turned to leave. But then she heard the young guitarist's voice in her head. The boy from the subway station. The one who had looked at her and seen something nobody else could see. Music never really leaves us. Even when we think it is gone, it is still there, waiting for us to come back. She stopped walking. Her hand moved to the bag on her shoulder, the bag that held her violin. She had started carrying it with her everywhere after that night when she played for an hour. She did not know why. Maybe she was afraid to leave it alone. Maybe she wanted it close to her, like a secret friend. And now here she was, standing in the middle of Grand Central Terminal, with a piano and a crowd, and a moment that felt like it was meant to be. Her heart was beating so fast she thought it might burst. This is crazy, she told herself. You are 52 years old. You have not performed since you were young. Everyone will think you are a fool. But another voice answered back, a quieter voice. A voice that sounded like the girl she used to be. What if this is your last chance? What if you walk away now and spend the rest of your life wondering what could have happened? Mei Lin closed her eyes. She thought about her father, who had always believed in her. She thought about her mother, who used to cry with joy whenever she played. She thought about all the teachers and audiences who had once called her a genius. She thought about the dreams she had buried so deep that she had almost forgotten they existed. And she thought about the woman she had become. The invisible woman. The ghost. The nobody. Was that really who she wanted to be for the rest of her life? Before she could change her mind, Mei Lin started walking toward the piano. Her legs felt weak. Her hands were shaking. Every step felt like walking through water. The crowd seemed so far away. And then suddenly it was right in front of her. A security guard looked at her with suspicion. A teenage girl glanced at her and then looked away. uninterested. An old man in a hat watched her with curious eyes. Mei Lin reached the platform where the piano sat. The person who had been playing stood up and walked away. The bench was empty, but Mei Lin did not sit down at the piano. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out her violin. A few people noticed. They looked confused. Some of them whispered to each other. Who was this strange woman with the old violin? What was she doing? A security guard took a step toward her. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said. "This is just for the piano." Mei Lin looked at him. Her voice came out quiet and rough, like she had forgotten how to speak. "Please," she said, "just one song. That is all I ask." The guard hesitated. Something in her eyes must have touched him, because he stepped back and nodded slowly. Mei Lin turned to face the crowd. There were maybe 40 or 50 people watching now. Some looked bored. Some looked curious. A few were already walking away. She felt a wave of fear crash over her. This was a mistake. She should put the violin away and disappear into the crowd like she always did. She should go back to being invisible. But then she lifted the violin to her shoulder. She placed the bow against the strings. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. And she began to play. The first note rang out across the terminal, clear and pure and achingly beautiful. It hung in the air like a bird taking flight, and then the second note followed, and the third, and suddenly the music was flowing out of her like a river that had been dammed for 30 years. She was playing Tchaikovsky, the same piece she had performed at her first concert, when she was 20 years old, and the whole world was ahead of her. The same piece that had made audiences weep, and critics call her a once-in-a-generation talent. Her fingers remembered every note. Her heart remembered every emotion. And as she played, something incredible started to happen. People stopped walking. Conversations died in mid-sentence. Phones came out of pockets. The crowd began to grow. And Mei Lin, the invisible woman, the ghost, the nobody, disappeared completely. In her place stood someone else. Someone who had been hiding inside her all along. A musician, a star, a woman who had finally found the courage to let the world hear her voice. The music filled Grand Central Terminal, like water filling a glass. It poured into every corner, every hallway, every space between the marble columns. It rose up to the painted ceiling with its golden stars, and wrapped itself around every person in the room. And one by one, the world stopped moving. A businessman who had been rushing to catch his train slowed down, then stopped completely. His briefcase hung forgotten at his side. A mother holding her daughter's hand paused in the middle of the floor, her mouth slightly open. A group of teenagers who had been laughing and joking fell silent, their eyes fixed on the small woman with the violin. Mei Lin did not see any of them. Her eyes were closed, and she was somewhere else entirely. She was 20 years old again, standing on the stage of a concert hall with velvet curtains and golden lights. She was wearing a beautiful dress, and the audience was holding their breath, waiting for her to begin. She was young and full of hope, and the whole world was stretching out before her like a promise. But she was also here, in this moment, 52 years old with rough hands and tired bones. She was both people at once. The girl she had been, and the woman she had become. And the music was the bridge between them. The Tchaikovsky Concerto was one of the most difficult pieces ever written for violin. It demanded everything from the musician: speed, precision, emotion, soul. Many professional violinists spent years trying to master it and never quite succeeded. But Mei Lin played it like she was breathing. Her fingers danced across the strings with a speed that seemed impossible. Her bow moved in long, sweeping strokes that pulled sounds from the instrument that did not seem real. The notes climbed higher and higher, then fell like rain, then rose again like birds taking flight. The crowd grew larger with every passing minute. People came from the subway platforms below. They came from the shops and restaurants around the terminal. They came from the streets outside. Drawn by some invisible force they could not explain, they pushed closer, forming a circle around the small woman who played with her eyes closed and tears streaming down her face. Yes, Mei Lin was crying. She did not realize it at first. She was too deep inside the music to notice anything else. But the tears came anyway, falling silently down her weathered cheeks. They were not tears of sadness. They were tears of release. 30 years of silence. 30 years of hiding. 30 years of pretending that this part of her did not exist. It all came pouring out through the music. In the crowd, something strange was happening. A young woman in a red coat felt her eyes sting, and she did not know why. She had never heard this piece of music before. She did not know anything about classical music, but something about the way this old woman played made her feel things she could not put into words. An old man who had lost his wife 2 years ago felt a lump form in his throat. The music sounded like grief and hope mixed together. It sounded like saying goodbye and hello at the same time. A little boy tugged on his father's sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, is she famous?" His father shook his head slowly, never taking his eyes off Mei Lin. "I do not know," he said. "But she should be." The music built and built, climbing towards something magnificent. Mei Lin's whole body moved with the violin, swaying and bending like a tree in a storm. Her gray hair had come loose from its pins and fell around her face. Her old coat hung open. She looked wild and free and completely transformed. She was not invisible anymore. For the first time in 30 years, people were truly seeing her. And then came the final passage. The most difficult part of the entire piece. A cascade of notes so fast and so complex that it seemed humanly impossible to play them all. Many famous violinists had stumbled here. Many had simplified the passage to make it easier. But Mei Lin did not simplify anything. She attacked those notes with everything she had. Her fingers flew across the strings in a blur. The bow moved so fast it seemed to disappear. The sound that came from her violin was like a storm breaking over the ocean. Like fireworks exploding in the night sky. Like a heart finally breaking free from its cage. And then, with one long, soaring note that seemed to hang in the air forever, it was over. Silence. Complete and total silence. Mei Lin stood there with her bow still raised, her chest heaving, her eyes still closed. She was afraid to open them. Afraid to see the empty space where the crowd should be. Afraid to discover that nobody had been listening. That she was still invisible. That the magic had all been in her head. She lowered her violin slowly. She opened her eyes. And what she saw took her breath away. There were hundreds of people, maybe 300, maybe more. They filled the entire main hall of Grand Central Terminal, standing shoulder to shoulder, packed together like they were at a concert. And every single one of them was staring at her. For one terrible moment, nobody moved. And then someone started clapping. It was a single pair of hands, somewhere in the back of the crowd. Then another pair joined in. Then another. Then 10 more. Then 100. The applause grew and grew until it was thunderous. It echoed off the marble walls and the painted ceiling. It shook the air. It filled Mei Lin's ears and her heart and her soul. People were cheering. People were shouting. Someone yelled brava at the top of their lungs. Someone else whistled with their fingers. The little boy who had asked if she was famous was jumping up and down, clapping as hard as he could. And everywhere, people were crying. Strangers wiped tears from their faces and looked at each other in amazement. What had just happened? Who was this woman? Where had she come from? Mei Lin stood in the center of it all, overwhelmed and trembling. She did not know what to do. She had forgotten what it felt like to be applauded. She had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. A woman pushed through the crowd and pressed a $20 bill into Mei Lin's hand. "You are incredible," she said, her voice shaking. "That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard." Before Mei Lin could respond, more people came forward. They shook her hand. They hugged her. They asked her name. They told her she had made them cry. They told her she had changed their whole day. A man in an expensive suit said he was a music producer and gave her his business card. A woman said she was a journalist and asked if she could write about her. Through it all, Mei Lin could barely speak. She just nodded and smiled and felt the tears continuing to fall down her face. But then she noticed something that made her heart stop. In the crowd, dozens of people were holding up their phones. They had been recording. They had captured the whole performance on video. Mei Lin did not think much of it at the time. She did not understand what it meant. She did not know that at that very moment, those videos were being uploaded to the internet. She did not know that within hours, millions of people around the world would watch them. She did not know that her life was about to change forever. All she knew was that for the first time in 30 years, she had played her violin for an audience. And they had heard her. They had really heard her. She was not invisible anymore, and she never would be again. Mei Lin went home that night feeling like she was walking on clouds. Her hands were still trembling. Her heart was still racing. She kept touching her violin case to make sure it was real, to make sure the whole evening had not been a dream. She barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the crowd. She heard the applause. She felt the warmth of strangers hugging her and telling her she was incredible. For one night, she had been somebody. And that was enough. That was more than enough. She went to work the next evening like she always did. She mopped the floors. She emptied the trash cans. She cleaned the bathrooms and wiped down the desks. The world was back to normal. The magic was over, or so she thought. When Mei Lin came home the next morning, there was a piece of paper stuck to her apartment door. It was a note from her neighbor, an old woman she had barely spoken to in all the years they had lived next to each other. The note said, "I saw you on the internet. You are famous." Mei Lin did not understand. She did not have a computer. She did not have a smartphone. She did not know anything about the internet, or social media, or viral videos. But when she went to the small library down the street and asked to use one of their computers, she discovered something that made her head spin. The videos from Grand Central Terminal were everywhere. They had been posted on every platform. They had been shared millions of times. News websites had written articles about her. Television stations were looking for her. People all over the world were watching her play and crying and asking the same question. Who is this woman? Mei Lin sat in front of that library computer for 2 hours, scrolling through page after page of comments and reactions. People from countries she had never heard of were saying her music had touched their hearts. People were sharing their own stories of lost dreams and second chances. Some people said they had watched the video 10 times, 20 times, 100 times. She could not believe it. This could not be real. Things like this did not happen to people like her, but it was real. And it was only the beginning. Within a week, reporters tracked her down. They came to her apartment building with cameras and microphones. They wanted to know her story. They wanted to know how a cleaning lady had learned to play violin like a world-class musician. At first, Mei Lin was terrified. She hid in her apartment and did not answer the door. She was not ready for this. She did not know how to talk to cameras. She did not know how to explain 30 years of silence and sacrifice and pain. But then she thought about her parents. She thought about how proud they would have been to see her play again. She thought about her father, who used to say that her music was a gift meant to be shared with the world, and she opened the door. The interviews were hard at first. Mei Lin was shy and awkward. She stumbled over her words. She cried when she talked about her family. But people did not mind. In fact, they loved her even more for being real, for being human, for not being polished and perfect like the celebrities they were used to seeing. Her story spread even further. A woman who gave up everything for her family. A woman who was invisible for 30 years. A woman who found the courage to play again in the middle of a train station. It was the kind of story that people needed to hear. The offers started coming in. A famous orchestra invited her to perform as a guest soloist. A music school offered her a teaching position. A documentary filmmaker wanted to make a movie about her life. A publisher wanted her to write a book. Mei Lin did not know how to handle any of it. She had spent so long being nobody that she did not know how to be somebody. She was overwhelmed and confused, and sometimes she just wanted to go back to her quiet life of mopping floors in empty buildings. But she also knew that she could not go back. Not really. Something had changed inside her that night in Grand Central Terminal. A door had opened, and she could not close it again. 6 months later, Mei Lin stood backstage at one of the most famous concert halls in the city. She was wearing a simple black dress that someone had helped her pick out. Her hair was pinned up neatly. Her old violin, the same one she had carried for 30 years, was in her hands. In a few minutes, she would walk out onto that stage and perform for a sold-out audience. 2,000 people had bought tickets to see her. The woman from the train station, the cleaning lady who played Tchaikovsky, she was shaking. Her mouth was dry. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. A young stagehand came up to her and asked if she needed anything. Water, a chair. A moment alone, Mei Lin shook her head. She looked at the young man and saw something in his eyes. Kindness. Respect. He was looking at her like she mattered. Like she was somebody worth looking at. It still surprised her, even after all these months. "Can I tell you something?" she said quietly. The young man nodded. 6 months ago, I was invisible. Nobody saw me. Nobody knew my name. I cleaned offices at night, and I thought that was all my life would ever be. And now I am here. She looked around at the beautiful backstage area, at the lights and the curtains and the buzzing energy of a live performance. I still do not understand how this happened. The young man smiled. Maybe it was supposed to happen, he said. Maybe you were never meant to be invisible. Maybe the world just needed time to find you. Mei Lin thought about that as she waited for her cue to go on stage. Maybe he was right. Maybe all those years of silence had been leading to this moment. Maybe the universe had a plan that she could not see until she was living it. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe she had just finally found the courage to stop hiding. To stop being afraid. To let the world hear what had been locked inside her for so long. The stage manager signaled that it was time. Mei Lin took a deep breath. She walked out of the wings and into the bright lights of the stage. The applause hit her like a wave. 2,000 people were on their feet before she even played a single note. They were clapping and cheering, and some of them were already crying. She stood at the center of the stage and looked out at all those faces. Young and old. Rich and poor. People from every walk of life. All gathered in one place to hear her play. She raised her violin. She placed the bow against the strings, and before she began, she spoke into the microphone. Her voice was soft, but it carried through the entire hall. I spent 30 years believing I had nothing left to give, she said. I was wrong. The music never left me. I just forgot to let it out. If there is something inside you that you have been hiding, something you have been too afraid to share, please do not wait 30 years like I did. The world needs your gift. Whatever it is, however small you think it is, the world is waiting to hear you. Then she closed her eyes, and she began to play. The music soared through the concert hall, filling every seat and every heart. And somewhere in the audience, a young woman who had given up on her own dreams felt something stir inside her. A teenage boy who thought he was not good enough wiped a tear from his eye. An old man who had stopped believing in second chances felt hope bloom in his chest. Because that is what music does. That is what courage does. It reminds us that it is never too late to be seen. It is never too late to be heard. And it is never, ever too late to let the world know who you really are.